In Book 1, Chapter 3, Rawls gives a very quick general summary of the main idea of the whole book, the main idea of a theory of justice. And so it's a kind of a snapshot of what the argument of the whole work is. And so what I'm going to do right now is kind of run through what he has to say there, explaining some of the elements. But the way that the work itself proceeds, a theory of justice proceeds, Rawls gives us this kind of quick overview and then goes into detail about the elements of this overview later on. And we're going to be doing the same exact thing. So I'm going to give you this quick overview, and then in subsequent videos, when we turn to, for example, books 2 and 3, we'll go into more details about some of the things that we're seeing in this quick overview. So this quick overview will probably still leave you with some questions. It's not going to pin down every detail for you, but it should hopefully give you a sense of the general trajectory of the argument of the project. And then also in chapter 4 of book 1, he kind of further fleshes out this main idea by talking about the original position in a bit more detail. So we'll include that here too. So recall what we were talking about with Rawls's social contract theory, his social contractarianism, as it might be called. Rawls is going to start from this thing, we don't really know what it is yet, called the original position. Right? He's not starting from the state of nature like Hobbes and Locke do. That's not the shape of the argument. He's got a different starting point, calls it the original position. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. And in that original position, Rawls is going to argue the people in that original position would agree upon certain principles of justice. And because people in that original position would agree upon these principles of justice, those are the true, legitimate, fair principles of justice. And in Rawls's view, there are two of them. There are two principles of justice that people in the original position would sign on to, would agree to structure society around, right? So people in the original position would agree to these two principles of justice. They would agree to structure the major social institutions of society in accord with these two principles of justice, right? So something like that is the main arc of the argument. That's what Rawls is going to try to show us. So let's talk now a little bit about the original position. What is this thing? So this is a technical term for Rawls. Now, as I'd indicated in a previous video, it's not supposed to be he's not describing some period of human history. Rawls doesn't think that this is just some position that people were in long ago. That's not the idea at all. The original position is really just like a frame of mind. It's a hypothetical frame of mind. I think he calls it something like that. He calls it hypothetical. It's a kind of perspective that we might take. And so Rawls would want, and what he would say is that it's the perspective that we should take when we're thinking about these basic questions about justice. Rawls thinks that anybody, you, me, people 50 years ago, people 200 years ago, whatever, anybody can enter into the original position. All it is to enter into the original position is to enter into this unbiased, fair frame of mind, this unbiased perspective, which we're going to look at the details of in just a second. So the crucial point that I want to make right now is that the original position is not some state of humanity that existed long ago, or some state of human beings that people were in when they were making the Constitution, or anything like that. Although maybe they were, I don't know. I don't know what Rawls would say about that. The main point is that it's a frame of mind, a certain perspective that anybody might inhabit, that we can inhabit. And Rawls would say that when we today are thinking about these, what justice really requires or what it really claims, we should enter into the original position. We should enter into this frame of mind. Okay, so what exactly is this frame of mind and what makes it fair and unbiased? Because this is what Rawls wants to say. The original position is an unbiased frame of mind. He lists a number of characteristics of it. In the first place, he wants to say that to enter into this frame of mind, when we enter into this frame of mind, put it this way, people in the original position are going to be concerned to further their own interests. And it seems like Rawls thinks this is just a feature of human beings and of human rationality. Human beings are concerned to further their own interests, right? So you have an interest in whatever, learning, you're concerned to further it. You have an interest in making money, you're concerned to further it. Which means you want to, satisfy it. You want to achieve it. You want to further it. Yeah. Human beings are like that. They're concerned to further their own interest. And we can assume that people in the original position are going to be like that. They're going to be concerned to further their own interests. So they have interests and they want to further them. Yeah. And that's going to be one of the motivations behind their adopting of these two principles of justice that we'll get to in just a second. Okay. Human beings are concerned to further their own interests. They want to satisfy their desires. They want to do what they want to do, something like that. Okay, fine. People in the original position, Rawls wants to say, are also rational. And what he means here, so the way he describes this, he wants to say, Rawls says, I don't want to build anything substantive into this notion. I want to keep it kind of very thin and meager. And what that means, what he's getting at, is by rational, all he means is that people in the original position will be able to accurately determine which things would in fact further their own interests and which things would thwart their own interests. The way Rawls puts it, this point about being rational, people in the original position are we can assume that they are good at means-end reasoning. Right? So means end reasoning is a term that you may hear in various social sciences. It's a term you hear in philosophy. And what it is it's a kind of reasoning where you match means to some end. So if my end is eating a bowl of ice cream right now, right, this is not a particularly hard problem to solve, how to go about doing that. But that would be my end. Well, how do I go about achieving that end? Well, I got to walk downstairs and I got to go get a bowl and I got to get the ice cream out and I got to scoop out or whatever, right? And then I can eat the ice cream, right? Those are the means towards satisfying my end. People in the original position are capable of doing that. They're rational in that sense. They will engage in accurate, correct means end reasoning. And so that's to say if something would actually thwart their ends, the achievement of their ends, of their interests, we can assume that they would see that. And so given that they're concerned to further their own interests, they're not going to be keen on adopting proposals or structures to society that would thwart them furthering their own interests. They'd be able to see that it would thwart them. And so they're going to be disposed against it because they want to further their own interests, right? That's all he means by rational, able to engage in this kind of means-end reasoning. A third feature of people in the original position, they are mutually disinterested. This can be potentially misleading, and Rawls is aware of this. It might, when you combine especially like 1 and 3, it might look like Rawls is saying people in the original position are just going to be these selfish, self-centered, whatever, egoistic, interest seekers or something like that. And Rawls at least wants to say, no, that's not how it's going to be. That's a mistaken impression. That's not actually what I'm saying. So, okay, so then what does mutually disinterested mean? What he means by that is something a little bit more specific. He would say they are mutually disinterested in the following sense. People in the original position don't take any interest or don't have any desire to further the interests of other people in the original position just for the sake of furthering their interests, right? So if you and me are in the original position, we're going to be mutually disinterested. What does that mean? That means I'm not going to want to further your interests just for the sake of furthering your interests, just because you're another person in the original position. I don't care really how you do. Just insofar as you are another person in the original position, I don't have any interest in how you do. I don't care how you do. If you do really well, great. If you do really poorly, well, okay. I'm not interested. I don't have any particular desire about how you do. I don't have any desire in how you do insofar as you are a fellow member in the original position. What Rawls wants to say, however, is that let's say the way it happens with people is often enough my own interests, what I am interested in, is furthering the interests, say, of my friends or my loved ones, my family. That might be an interest I have, right? And so that would fall under number one, according to Rawls. And so, and he says that that kind of thing is legitimate. That could be, that's fine. That's how human beings are. Um, that's the sense in which he's not saying people in the original position are just selfish and self-centered, right? Because people in the original position can still take an interest in how other people do, but not insofar as those other people are mere members of the original position, but insofar as those people have some sort of relationship to you, to the person in question, right? So this is kind of a subtle point. So let me illustrate it with my oldest son. Yeah, so I got a son. I got two. I got the oldest one. Okay, let's just talk about the oldest one. I might let's say we're both in the original position. He's only 8, so I don't think he'd be in the original position, but we're both in the original position. Okay, fine. Rawls is saying, I am not going to take any interest in how he does in virtue of his being a member of the original position. Insofar as I look at him and I say, you're just another person here in the original position, I don't take any particular interest in how he does. If he does well, fine. If he does poorly, fine. But I can also look at him through the perspective of his being my son. And in as much as I'm his father and he's my son, I want him to do well. I want him to be happy and successful and blah, blah, blah. Well, then I might take an interest in him, right? That's fine. That's legitimate, Rawls would want to say. That kind of interest, right? I'm not taking an interest in how he does in as much as he's a member of the original position. I don't care about that. We're mutually disinterested. But in as much as he has this personal relationship to me, fine, I can be concerned to further his interest because that's kind of bound up with my own interests. That would kind of fall under one, right? That's his idea. And so if you have two just total strangers in the original position, no relationship to each other, well, yeah, then I'm just not going to care at all how they do. I don't care how that person does, if they do well, if they do poorly, and likewise, they don't care if I do well, if I do poorly. That's the idea. That's what it is to be mutually disinterested. I don't take any special interest in anybody just insofar as they are a member of the original position. Yeah, something like that. It's a bit of a subtle point. But what Rawls is trying to do there is what he's pushing back against is this idea. And the reason I go into this subtlety, he's pushing back against the idea that people in the original position are just selfish and self-interested. He says, no, that's not right, because it can be part of your own interests to, just given the way human beings are constructed, can be part of your own interests to further the interests of other people. And so that's fine, and that can be part of your own interests. I'm not saying that they're not like that. Okay, that people in the original position are not like that. Okay. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, but I'm going to punt on it for now, we're going to talk about it later when we read some excerpts from, I believe it's from book 2, or it might be book 3, actually. He says that people in the original position are going to be behind the, quote, veil of ignorance. This is another technical term of Rawls's, veil of ignorance. And just very quickly, what it means is they're not going to know any kind of particularities about themselves. And so when we enter into this frame of mind, we abstract away from all the particular features of ourselves. So people are going to be ignorant of those things. They're going to be ignorant of how much money they have, of what kinds of talents they have, of what class they're in, of what their educational level is, what religion they are, what race they are, what ethnicity, what gender. People are going to be ignorant of all of these things in the original position. And Rawls thinks, and we're going to talk about this later, Rawls thinks this is what renders the original position fair and unbiased. And we'll talk about it next when we read book 3. So we'll punt on that one for now. But the veil of ignorance is really what renders the original position fair. And it's what therefore renders agreements from the original position, agreements about principles of justice, kind of fair, right? And it's what gives us legitimate principles of justice. Okay, so that's the original position. It's a particular frame of mind that anybody can enter at any time. And if we're debating these kind of fundamental issues of justice, that's the frame of mind we should be in, right? Rational, we're thinking of ourselves as these kind of rational agents concerned to further their own interests, not taking any particular interest in other people just for the sake of taking interest in them. And we're unbiased in as much as we're ignorant of all these particularities about ourselves. That's the frame of mind we should be in when we're thinking about justice. That will make our thoughts, our agreements fair. All right, so Rawls is going to want to say people in that situation, in that frame of mind, are going to agree upon 2 principles of justice. Why they would agree on these 2 principles, we're going to talk about when we get into book 3. What the 2 principles of justice are, however, Rawls kind of gestures towards here in chapter 3. I'm going to give the more definitive formulation of them. This isn't the formulation you find in chapter 3. This is the formulation you find later in book 3. I'm going to give that formulation because it's the one we're going to work with. But what he says in chapter 3 bears obvious similarities to this more accurate formulation. So I'm giving the more accurate formulation. So the first principle of justice is what he calls the principle of equal liberty. And you read it, and it looks like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of something we would all think, right? And it claims that everyone has an equal right to the most extensive basic liberties compatible with the same liberties for all, right? The principle of equal liberty. Again, we're going to talk about this more later. Book 2, we're going to read his kind of more definitive statement of these 2 principles. And at that time, we'll talk about what exactly all this means. I mean, very intuitively, the idea is basically everyone gets equal liberties. Everyone gets equal rights. But, he phrases it a bit more in a bit more complicated manner than that. We'll talk about those complications later. But that's the first principle. That's what people in the original position would agree to. They'd agree to structure society in a way that accords with that principle. Okay. Second principle is more complicated. There are 2 parts to the second principle. And the second principle as a whole doesn't really have a name. It's just called the second principle of justice. But each of its subparts, so there's 2 subparts to the second principle, each of its subparts has a name. So the second principle has to deal with social and economic inequalities, right? So, for example, income inequality. uh, is income inequality okay, or how should it look, or what level of inequality is okay, and so on. Those kinds of questions. Or is inequality just not okay at all? That's what the second principle deals with: social and economic inequalities. And what it says is that social and economic qualities should, first, in the first place, be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Again, we're going to talk about this more later when we read book 2. But very basically, the idea is certain jobs are going to have a higher salary attached to them. Those jobs should be equally available to everybody. Fair equality of opportunity. That doesn't mean, well, certain discriminations can be made, but no arbitrary discriminations. Something like that is the idea. And again, this is fairly, and once we unpack this, what we're going to see is that he means something fairly, I don't want to say commonsensical, but familiar, something that we've seen before, that I trust you've probably heard of or seen before. That's kind of a part of the legal precedent of the United States, in fact. All right, so we get this first part of the second principle, this fair equality of opportunity principle. So far, what we've seen with the principle of equal liberty and this fair equality of opportunity principle, none of that is distinctively Rawlsian. You might think that these things are like, yeah, these are good principles, but there's nothing unique or terribly novel about them. We've seen, everyone should have equal rights. Well, yeah, I mean, that's an idea out there that that just about everybody accepts. And so there's nothing, new here, really. And you might even say the same thing about the fair equality of opportunity principle. It's the second part of the second principle that is distinctively Rawlsian, that Rawls is best known for. And when people talk about a Rawlsian conception of justice, they typically have in mind the second part of the second principle. And what it states is that social and economic inequalities should be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. That's going to require a lot of unpacking. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about what that means and why people in the original position would agree to it. And indeed, that's what Rawls spends most of his time arguing for. When he turns to why would people in the original position accept these two principles, the bulk of his attention goes to that second part of the second principle. People call it, I think Rawls himself called it this, the difference principle, right? And at first glance, and there isn't going to be much I can do to dispel this right now, at first glance, it looks like, how is that even be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged? That just doesn't even look, how does that work? We'll talk about it, right? So that one might make the least sense right now, but in certain ways, it's the most important. And as we proceed, as we read more of Rawls, we'll see what exactly that means and why exactly he thinks people in the original position would accept